Rising above the clouds, these volcanoes are evidence of the forces that have helped shape the diverse landscapes of New Zealand today. New Zealand is located on a band of volcanic activity known as the Pacific Ring of Fire. How were these volcanoes created? And what are their characteristics? What are the dangers posed by volcanic events? And what is being researched to investigate the forces beneath New Zealand? Three of New Zealand's largest volcanoes are located within the Tongariro National Park in the North Island.
Volcanoes, they're an ever-present threat in New Zealand. They spew gas, lava and ash, and they can blow their tops suddenly with little warning. We're going to explore where they are, how they work, and what might happen to us should they explode again in future. The movement of tectonic plates that causes volcanoes. And here we're on the boundary of two of them. We have the thin, dense crust of the Pacific plate, which is riding up against the thick, buoyant crust of the Australian plate. When the two of them come together, the oceanic plate slides below. As it slides below, it heats up, releases water, creating magmas. We call this process subduction. And subduction's occurring all around the Pacific plate, causing the ring of fire with volcanoes in New Zealand, America, Japan and Indonesia. The heat that's driving this process is generated by raging nuclear fission deep in the earth. This is quite ironic for a country like New Zealand, which considers itself nuclear free.
At the collision point of the Pacific and Australian plates, two quite separate movements of the Earth's crust are occurring. To the northeast, the Australian plate is diving beneath the Pacific plate. To the southwest, the reverse is occurring, with the Pacific plate being subducted beneath the Australian plate. Sitting between these two immense sections of the Earth's crust, New Zealand is being twisted and stretched. Eruptions on varying scales occur frequently, and volcanism has been responsible for many of New Zealand's geographical features, especially in the North Island.
Ruapehu is one of our most active volcanoes. It's been erupting for around 350,000 years. On average, every 50 years, it produces a major eruption. And these last two eruptions have been the biggest to have affected New Zealand over the last 125 years.
As well as ash, boiling water and steam was blasted thousands of metres into the air. Rocks were catapulted out of its crater, landing up to 1.5 kilometres away. These powerful eruptions from beneath New Zealand have occurred over millions of years, with the first recorded volcanic event in 200 AD. Volcanism, in all its forms, will persist for millennia to come.
Explosive, ash-producing eruptions will continue to occur in New Zealand. Our risk is increasing with our population growing and our ever-increasing reliance on technology. Thankfully though, our research is world-leading in the areas of ash impacts and mitigation of those impacts on our electricity supplies, on our water and on our farms. The key thing though now is to make sure that these plans are in place and people know how to deal with the impacts of poisonous ash as it falls on our landscape and on our cities.
The first people to witness the impacts of New Zealand's early eruptions were the Māori, who are the indigenous people. These events became part of their oral tradition, Mātauranga Māori.
A Māori worldview sees the natural world in personified forms with human qualities. In oral traditions and narratives describing our world, volcanoes are characterized both at a grand level and a local level. And in one version, Ruaumoko is said to be the unborn son of sky and earth, who forever seeks revenge, a vengeance for the separation of his parents by his elder brothers. And thus, his seasonal subterranean movement causes eruptions on the land surface, and this causes Hinepuia, the volcano woman, to rise in volcanic form back in Hawaii.
In 1953, one of these subterranean movements caused a major rail disaster on Ruapehu. The water level in Ruapehu's crater lake had been rising, and the barrier holding back the lake water collapsed.
Late on the 24th of December, a trainload of passengers was bound for Auckland. They were nearing the Tangiwai rail bridge here near Waiouru.
The water poured down the mountain, carrying with it tons of mud, sand and rock. This foaming mass of liquid debris, known as a laha, smashed into the rail bridge.
10 p.m, most people were sleeping on the train, when suddenly around 1 million cubic metres of water burst out of Crater Lake through an ice cave, sweeping down the flanks of the volcano. It raced to the site before sweeping away the foundations from this bridge. The train driver had no chance. The locomotive and the first 4 carriages plunged into the river, whilst the 5th remained teetering at the edge, before it too fell in.
"151 people were killed. Lahars play a significant role in shaping landscapes and biodiversity. There are various kinds of lahars. A debris flow lahar contains varying sizes of sediment and flows like a thick sludge. A hyper-concentrated flow lahar contains less sediment and flows like a liquid.
So what kind of volcano is Ruapehu? We call it a stratovolcano, a cone or a mountain-building volcano made up of alternating layers of hard lava through to soft pumice and ash and boulders. Stratovolcanoes are characterized by long periods of dormancy or quiet, interrupted by explosive or effusive eruptions. Explosive eruptions occur when gas remains trapped inside a viscous magma. So as this magma rises towards the surface, the load of rock decreases and this gas expands, creating a magma froth which bursts out of the top of the volcano. Sometimes you can get a rock cap which builds the pressure up underneath it, and this causes a violent blast. Now, picture 100,000 tonnes per second being blown out of the top of the volcano, and this rises up sometimes 20 kilometres into the atmosphere. At the margins of this column, we have collapses of material, when this produces clouds of ash and gas which travel across the landscape, and we call pyroclastic flow. Effusive eruptions, on the other hand, are a much more gentle process. They involve lava that spills out onto the ground. Now, in this case, the gas has already escaped, or it can easily bubble through the magma. And lava flows, well, they depend on the slope and the composition of the lava. Sometimes they can travel at walking speed, like on Hawaii, and other times they squeeze out very slowly, like toothpaste out of a tube. In this case, they well up to form a dome, which then solidifies in place.
One of the largest eruptions in New Zealand's recent history occurred at Mount Tarawera.
Mount Tarawera is one of a series of volcanoes that run through the central North Island.
Tarawera's unique appearance was created by previous eruptions. Domes with steep sides and flat tops are made of rhyolite rock, a type of hardened magma deposited by an eruption. Tarawera also has large, deep, wide depressions, which are empty magma chambers that have collapsed in on themselves. Large eruptions are rare, and there are often thousands of years between events. The most recent eruption of Mount Tarawera was in 1886 and was especially devastating due to the 1300 degrees Celsius basaltic magma reacting with the surrounding groundwater. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, on June 10th, 1886, magma started rising from beneath the mountain, and a major volcanic event commenced. The volcano was ripped in half, and the basaltic ash and scoria erupted. Debris rained down, mantling the mountain landscape with a red layer of basaltic scoria. As the magma rose beneath neighbouring lakes, this created boiling mud, which swept over the landscape, killing more than 150 people from the local Te Arawa tribe. This event destroyed everything in its path, including the world-famous pink and white terraces. Te Arawa draw on knowledge of the land from Mātauranga Māori to interpret and understand this loss.
Our knowledge and our mātauranga tell us of the eruption of Mount Tarawera. It goes back to the time of a great tohunga, a great high priest of Te Arawa that arrived here on a waka called Ngā Taroirangi. Ngā Taroirangi had heard of a taniwha, of a high being that was devouring our people, and Ngā Taroirangi traversed and came through here to engage with them. During that engagement, he forced Tamohoi down into the depths and bowels of the mountain, and as he drew his leg out, the mountain closed and forever entombed and incarcerated Tamohoi in the depths of the mountain. We know and say that on the 10th of June, when the mountain erupted, it was Tamohoi bursting and freeing himself from his permanent incarceration.
Tarawera was created by magma chambers exploding. When these chambers erupt, the landscape above them collapses, producing a caldera. Eruptions of this type are violent, producing enormous clouds of ash, which often rise as much as 50 kilometers into the atmosphere. Pyroclastic flows can occur. These high-density mixtures of hot, dry rock fragments and hot gases move at high speeds to knock down, shatter, bury, or carry away nearly all objects and structures in their way. Ultimately, the caldera may fill with water, forming lakes from where rivers and streams rise.
The word volcano is derived from Vulcan, the Roman god of fire.
So what can science tell us about the nature of volcanoes and why they erupt? Volcanoes are actually vents through which magma reaches the surface, where it erupts as ash, scoria, or lava. Magma originates deep in the Earth's mantle, often erupting along the collision boundary of tectonic plates, as we see at Ruapehu and Tarawera. In some rare situations, magma will also erupt within plates, such as the volcanic field amongst which the city of Auckland is constructed. Unlike earthquakes and landslides, which might last only minutes, volcanic eruptions can occur over days, months, or maybe even years, with impacts reaching over thousands of square kilometres. Volcanoes can erupt explosively, producing ash, or effusively, producing lava flows. So where does magma originate from, and what's the driving force? Magma is a complex, high-temperature fluid substance formed in low-pressure environments within several kilometres of the Earth's surface. Temperatures range between 700 and 1300 degrees Celsius, causing magma to rise through the Earth's mantle when a structural zone allows movement. The molten body sometimes reaches the surface to become a volcanic eruption. Tongariro National Park is a dual World Heritage Area in recognition of both its natural and cultural values. Ongoing volcanology research is conducted at the three principal volcanoes, Ruapehu, Ngauruhoe and Tongariro. These mountains also hold deep spiritual significance for Māori.
The Tongariro volcanic complex consists of 12 or more overlapping volcanic vents, each with its own personality and age. Some violently spew ash, others gently ooze lava. Parts of the volcano are as old as 250,000 years. Others are still growing today. For example, growing pains were shown in 2012 when Tamari erupted, peppering the Tongariro hiking trail with hot volcanic rocks.
Ngauruhoe is the youngest vent in the Tongariro volcanic complex on the central plateau of the North Island, and first erupted about 2,500 years ago. Although a volcano in its own right, it is technically a secondary cone of Tongariro.
Back in 1973, Ngauruhoe began discharging lava. Little did nearby residents know that this was the beginning of a more explosive eruption. 2 years later, onlookers heard large bangs and saw an expanding column of ash. Blocks and bombs flew out of the volcano more than 2 kilometers, some of the size of cars. The column itself towered above the volcano, more than 13 kilometers high. It then collapsed under its own weight, producing a lethal mixture of ash, gas, glowing lava bombs that cascaded down the side of the volcano.
Volcanologists study volcanic events to bring fresh insight and greater understanding of these explosive forces of nature.
We might never be able to predict every volcanic eruption because the circumstances are hidden beneath our feet and the build-up to each eruption is complex and unique. We gradually get to know the character of our volcanoes. Each has a somewhat personalized precursory signal. The signal is recorded by GeoNet and interpreted by GNS Science, but the exact nature that the eruption will take is still impossible to predict. 2 successive eruptions may be quite different in size and style and pose a different risk to the community. Each volcano is assigned an alert level based on its current status. from 0 indicating dormancy up to 5 indicating that there's a large hazardous volcanic eruption in progress. Key warning signs involve changes away from background activity. Firstly, an increase in the number and a shallowing of volcanic earthquakes as gases rise. Secondly, changes in the composition and the temperature of the gases coming out of the volcano. And thirdly, changes in the volcanic surface as the volcano inflates and deflates like a balloon, reflecting pressure changes inside. Technology is improving. The future lies in the use of drones and satellites. Our instruments become increasingly precise and have the ability to crunch more and more data. And so, volcanic eruptions will never be preventable, but we will get better at reducing risk and mitigating volcanic disasters.
As well as studying volcanism in the field, volcanologists also design experiments to simulate volcanic activity and events in a controlled environment. They're able to capture data and better understand the physical impacts of volcanic events.
Here we are at the University of Canterbury. We've got two rather cool large pieces of scientific equipment that we use to understand what happens when molten bombs and blocks come flying out of a volcano.
Today we have an air-compressed cannon and we're going to shoot rocks down towards the ground onto different building materials, and this simulates what happens to buildings in volcanic environments when they get hit by ballistics.
So the cannon's going to fire the rock through the roof, and you can imagine if you were sitting at home watching TV under this roof. 3, 2, 1.
It's punctured right through and pulled all those screws out as well.
Should we try the tile roof now?
Yeah.
Go!
The rock's gone straight through the roof, destroyed it completely.
These type of experiments really help us understand how different building materials behave when they're getting hit by volcanic blocks like this.
Whakaari, White Island, is an active volcano and is the peak of a submarine mountain rising 1,600 metres above the sea floor, making this the highest volcano in New Zealand.
Whakaari, or White Island, is one of our most active volcanoes. It's also one of our largest. You wouldn't think so, because it's only a small island 320 metres high. It rises out of the Bay of Plenty, and 1,600 metres below us, this volcano is 17 kilometres wide.
Whakaari, White Island, is New Zealand's most active volcano. Māori named the island Te Puia o Whakaari, meaning the dramatic volcano. Captain James Cook described it as White Island because it appeared to be in a cloud of white steam.
Above the sea level, White Island is dominated by this enormous crater feature. Inside the crater we've got fumaroles and steam vents and mud pools. And the walls of the crater, they tell us a story of the repeated cycles of volcanic activity that has built up White Island. Now as we go towards the centre, since around 2003, the central vent area has been covered by water, sometimes forming a really spectacular coloured lake. There have been 2 attempts at mining the sulphur on White Island. The second of these in the 20s resulted in these buildings, and it ended in financial failure. The first of these on the same site in 1914 ended in tragedy. 10 men were sleeping in their beds. Suddenly, the southern flank of the crater collapsed. sweeping down through this area with a massive landslide. That landslide swept all the buildings and all the people into the sea. Later, when rescuers came, the only thing they could find was Peter the cat.
Volcanic activity has created a moonscape shaped and patterned by eruptions, high temperature and gas exploding through fumaroles.
So what's surrounding me here are these beds of material draping the landscape, and these beds are made up of blocks and bombs that have been exploded or blasted out of the centre of White Island. The difference is, a block is solid when it was ejected, and here's an example. This one's a piece of old rock that's been blasted out in a solid chunk. Whereas a bomb, when they come out, they're wet and they splatter on the ground like a cow pack. Here's a really nice one. And if I break a piece of that off, it's actually really, really light and it's full of vesicles. Either way, they're both lethal. The reason why White Island is here is it's part of the subduction zone running through New Zealand. We also know this as the Ring of Fire. Since about 1976, there's been many eruptions recorded here. Mostly, though, they just affect this local area. On the mainland, the most we get is a dusting of ash. Here, though, we see this plume of white steam and acid gas, and it's this plume that you can see from the mainland. Now we've come into the central part of this crater. It's a real cauldron. This is where all the gas and heat is rising up from the volcano, and you can see the boiling, bubbling mud and so on. But a lot of this yellow material, this is sulfur that's forming in and around the fumaroles. Beautiful yellow crystals of sulfur here, that's all formed there. It's a great place to monitor what's going on below. The GeoNet project has got seismometers to look for earthquakes. They look for the temperature of the gas and the steam, and they use this to define what is the level of activity of the volcano. On a scale of 1 to 5, White Island normally sits at around level 1 or 2. Most of the eruptions from White Island are little short affairs in the last few years, 10 minutes long. But the question is, how do we know that this kind of short-lived eruption might continue? If we look at the geologic record of the volcano, it can do much, much more than this.
The trebuchet is basically a big catapult, and what it does is simulates the trajectory of ballistics as they get thrown out of the volcano.
And what we're going to be slinging today is silly putty wrapped in a balloon, which can deform as it flies through the air, representing molten magma. And the experiment's going to help us inform our models that predict where bombs land in a volcanic eruption. 3, 2, 1, go! Yes, I think we had a couple of things going on. I think you could see it stretching in the air and stretching out.
Yeah, it was pretty liquidy.
This information will really help us predict how these bombs change shape in the air and where they'll land.
Rangitoto is located in Auckland Harbour and last erupted when early Māori were living on nearby Motutapu Island. Associate Professor Phil Shane has been conducting a research program on Rangitoto.
Here on Rangitoto volcano, our team of scientists from the University of Auckland have been working for quite a long time to work out how old the volcano is and how it erupted.
The last known eruption was about 500 years ago. But how was the volcano created? And when was the first eruption? Scientists drilled through the rock to obtain samples from when the island first emerged from the ocean. As it broke the surface, large effusive eruptions occurred. Over time, layers of lava built up, creating the island. Using radiocarbon dating technology, scientists think Rangitoto could have been periodically erupting over the last 7,000 years. Rangitoto is part of the Auckland volcanic field, consisting of over 50 individual volcanoes, which have been active for at least 250,000 years. In the initial period, lava flowing from Rangitoto was the consistency of honey, creating lava tubes and caves as it flowed down to the ocean. More recent eruptions were far more explosive, evidenced by the small crater on the summit. Maori living on Rangitoto and nearby Motutapu witnessed the eruption, and their oral history describes it.
When a giant husband and wife complained and cursed the fire goddess Mahuika for letting their house fire go out, she sent Mataho, the god of eruptions and earthquakes, to teach them a lesson. He sent an eruption to destroy their mountain home. The earth swallowed up their home and Lake Pupuke was formed. He then imprisoned the two giants in the peaks of a new mountain surrounded by the sea and called it Rangitoto.
A similar eruption is likely to occur again, and scientists are helping us to prepare for such an event. At Massey University in Palmerston North, Professor Cronin has been researching pyroclastic flows, destructive masses of extremely hot ash, lava fragments and gases ejected explosively from a volcano and typically moving at great speed.
Here we are at Massey University, where scientists have built this gigantic experiment. Gert's in charge of the facility. Tell us what it does.
We are going to simulate the natural conditions of a superheated pyroclastic flow, how it hits the slope of a volcano and destroys everything in its path.
Could it go horribly wrong?
We'll keep you safe, Shane.
Let's give it a go.
So 6,000 cubic meters of superheated volcanic ash and gas will collapse down onto the slopes of the volcano, and we'll be able to measure the velocity and dynamic pressure inside them.
This gives us a chance to look right inside a collapsing flow. Ready? 3, 2, 1. We use experiments like this to understand how fast and how destructive these flows are. This is really important because in our largest city, Auckland, we know that 35 of the 50 volcanoes have produced flows just like this. I'm standing above New Zealand's biggest volcano. This is Lake Taupō. It's a caldera volcano, and it produced the most violent eruption the world has ever seen in the last 5,000 years. During the high point of this eruption, a column of ash rose 50 kilometres into the air. Water entered the vent area and it caused it to collapse. This produced flows that spread out over 80 kilometres from the volcano. During this event, around 100 cubic kilometres of magma was thrown into the air. This eruption was so big, its effects were found in ice cores as far away as Antarctica and Greenland.
Taupō was the site of an even bigger event, known as the Orowanui eruption, dating back to 24,000 BC. This eruption saw almost the entire North Island covered in ash to a depth of up to 200 metres. and over 530 billion cubic metres of material was ejected during the eruption. Valleys were filled, levelling the topography, and all vegetation was flattened. Today, Lake Taupo partly fills the caldera created by this eruption. It's not just volcanoes which reveal the forces at play beneath New Zealand.
On the surface, geothermal fields consist of spectacular springs, geysers and boiling mud pools. But actually beneath the surface, much more is going on.
Geothermal springs and geysers are surface expressions of volcanism. Imagine them as taps to a much larger plumbing system beneath our feet.
Here in Rotorua, in the Taupo volcanic zone, the heat flow out of the ground is extreme. In fact, the amount of energy released by these geothermal systems is probably greater than all of New Zealand's hydroelectric generation capacity.
Magma, located deep below the Earth's surface, is the driving force behind geothermal springs and geysers. Water falling on the Earth's surface percolates down through fractures and faults and is heated by magma, causing it to rise back to the surface.
As well as geothermal vents on land, there are hydrothermal vents in the deep sea. They're a bit like geysers, but they erupt superheated plumes of metal-rich fluids. These hydrothermal vents in the sea are often associated with submarine volcanoes. There are numerous submarine volcanoes north of New Zealand.
Hydrothermal vents in the deep sea can be hot or cool. Hot vents can reach temperatures of over 300 degrees Celsius and are referred to as black smokers, erupting metal fluids rich in copper and zinc, even supporting colonies of life around the vent. The cooler vents, white smokers, erupt silica and carbonate. New Zealand sits on top of vast amounts of energy, which is released in many different ways. The city of Auckland is constructed on a field of active volcanoes. Could a catastrophic volcanic event occur here?
In the Auckland volcanic field, you can see these volcanoes all around us here. This field began erupting about 250,000 years ago. We think it's dormant, but dormant does not mean the same as extinct, as the Rangitoto eruption 500 years ago tells us. This volcanic field is by no means finished with its eruptions. It's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when the next eruption occurs. As for the history for the Auckland volcanic field, there have been 55 eruptions here. Some are really obvious, like the Big Shield volcano at Rangitoto or these scoria cones, but others are not so obvious, like the explosion craters that are around the landscape, and so these form these depressions. Across the volcanic field, we've had lava flows produced, there are lava caves, and many of the volcanic deposits have buried old forest areas, such as at Takapuna, or even down towards the airport.
Māori have inhabited the fertile volcanic soils of the Auckland region since the 14th century.
Auckland was known by Māori as Tamaki Makoto, literally of 100 lovers, but really meaning desired by many, and was fought over for centuries. For Māori, the volcanic hills of Tamaki were ideal locations for pā, or fortified villages. They were easily defendable and were ready-made lookouts. Multiple iwi, or tribes, recount centuries of conflict and negotiation for settlement and control of the area. Today, earthworks in the volcanic scoria are evidence of the defensive sites at Maunga Fo, Mount Eden, Maunga Kiakia, One Tree Hill, Maunga Rei, Mount Wellington, and Te Upoko o Mataoho, Mount Mangere.
What would happen if the Auckland volcanic field were to suddenly wake up now? In our scenario, the magma has come up from about 80 kilometres below the ground, and it's come up very suddenly, and without warning, it's interacted with the water below the ground, and this water-magma interaction is created in a very, very explosive mixture. Imagine something like a nuclear blast. Not only do we have the column, but we have these surrounding currents that radiate out about 3 kilometres around from the volcano, destroying everything in their path. They could kill thousands of people, many thousands more would be injured. Parts of Auckland would be destroyed, and the costs would run to billions of dollars.
Volcanoes are a surface expression of the immense power beneath New Zealand. The potential for major volcanic events is very real. And we must plan to mitigate the risks, knowing that any time, devastation could strike. The forces beneath New Zealand have shaped the landscape in a myriad of ways, and will continue to do so for millennia.